Hi, everyone. We're seeing some people join. Welcome to our webinar today, Maximizing Procurement Value with Contracts, Lessons from Confluent's Tech-Driven Approach. We're so excited to have you all here. My name is Leslie Henthorne. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Ironclad, and I'll be moderating this conversation today. Just to introduce myself, a little bit of knowledge here. I am passionate about contracts after working in marketing and processing probably thousands of contracts in my career, working with fantastic procurement teams, and have been in marketing for about 20 years, have been at Ironclad for the last 2.5. What I want to do, though, is not talk too much about me. I just want to say that's why I'm here. I'm passionate about contracts, but I'm passionate about working with procurement too. And we are here today with one of my great friends, Nanci Cook-Walker, who is leading the procurement team at Confluent, and someone that I actually had the pleasure of working with in my last role at Twilio. Nanci gave me a lot of grace. She worked with me as kind of a grumpy stakeholder from time to time when we were processing contracts. And so, Nanci, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to this team. I'm seeing people from London, LA, San Francisco, North Carolina, Atlanta. You've got a good scale here in this audience. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about you?
Well, fantastic. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Nanci Cook-Walker, as Leslie mentioned, and I am thrilled to be here speaking with you about our experience with Ironclad at Confluent. And like Leslie, I am passionate about procurement. I love it. I've been doing it for a long time and just happy to share my experiences with you all.
Thank you so much, Nanci. We're excited to have you here to share your experiences too. And I would love for everyone to know, we're going to get to your questions and answers during today's conversation. And there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. And we're just going to jump right in because I think there's so many good tidbits that folks interested in this topic are going to get. So Nanci, with all your experience in procurement over the years, can you tell us today a little bit about your role at Confluent and that background, that growth to getting to Confluent?
Absolutely. So a little bit about me. My specialty is really building procurement departments from the ground up for high growth tech companies. I have been procurement employee number 1 at my last 3 roles. I won't lie, it's a grind. But I do love it very much, and there's so much satisfaction that comes from that building, from the ground up. I love Confluent. I have been here for almost 5 years, and I have a small but very mighty team, and we manage operations, so procurement operations, which is why I'm here, as well as strategic sourcing. And together, we oversee procurement, travel, expense, and credit cards here at Confluent.
That's amazing, Nanci. And you said you have a small but mighty team. How small but mighty is your team?
Well, we have 6, a total of 6 in here in the U.S. We also have 2 amazing folks that help us out in shared services in Bangalore, India.
Nice. And how many employees are you talking about at Confluent today that your team is helping across all of those functions?
So we have about 3,000 employees today, and we are about, I think it is, I lost count, but I believe it's about 22 entities internationally.
Dang. Okay. Well, that's amazing. And that is a lot to process in terms of volume for your small but mighty team. So that gives people a good understanding of what we're talking about when we go through these metrics today and your experience. And for those that are joining, I just want to say from an Ironclad perspective, Confluent was one of our earliest customers, and we're super grateful that you are working with us. And Nanci, you're at 3,000 today, but I know that you've been with the company as they've gone through a period of hyper growth and faced a lot of changing business needs. I'd love for you to share your experience on how you've gotten Ironclad to scale to meet the needs that you're seeing today across your business.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I started almost 5 years ago, and I do have a funny story to share on
Okay.
how Ironclad came to be. So it actually predates me. So it we engaged Ironclad before there was a procurement department, before I came along, and it was implemented by the at that point, I believe it was a person in accounts payable, as well as some legal team members. And
Hmm.
so when I came on board, I had to basically use my first 60, 90 days to kind of evaluate the state of the union, if you will. And as I was speaking with different teams who were managing disparate parts of a procurement
Yeah.
process, it was brought to my attention by some very vocal employees at the time that every things are broken and we need to get rid of Ironclad. And I basically said, hey, time out, folks. Ripping and replacing a system is expensive and it's not easy. So let's work together, figure out what's going on here. What are your true issues, and then let's evaluate before we go down the path of ripping and replacing. And so I was able to deep dive into the issues, and essentially the business had changed. So when I came on board in 2020 and they implemented Ironclad in 2017, the business
Yeah.
had changed. Now there was also a procurement person. So again, procurement employee number one. And I realized that the system was actually fine. We just had to do essentially a mini re-implementation of the tool to make it work for how business was operating in 2020. Um,
Yeah.
and we ended up being very successful in doing that. And as procurement grew and as our business grew, we were able to use and continue to use Ironclad today successfully.
Well, that's exciting, Nancy. And I think probably many folks on the call have seen where systems, might be recognized as failing, but a lot of times there is some process around that system that you've got to think about. And for the folks on the call that are listening to the story, I'll just share with you from an Ironclad perspective. One of the biggest challenges in CLM period has been the implementation. It's something that we hear about a lot. 50% of all CLM implementations fail. A lot of that has to do with the business processes and documentation and understanding what the business needs to set up the tool correctly. So I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into your mini re-implementation you just talked about, and how you could accomplish that as a one-woman team. I think we'd love to hear about your successes there and what you learned about
Yeah.
driving that process.
Absolutely. So this was before I had any additional employees, so it was just me. And I was able, first of all, Ironclad supported me. So we basically had to look at the workflows that we were using and basically revamp them, like I said, to accommodate how we were doing business in 2020 versus 2017. So
Okay.
I'll give you a silly example.
Yeah.
The previous team had built in vendor onboarding into Ironclad, and that's not where it needs to live. So we pulled that out, and then we were able to
Mm.
add some other functionality within that. So Ironclad supported me with redoing these workflows, but then I was able to maintain it on my own. So I did
Mhm.
not have business systems support because the team wasn't built out yet, and I was able to do it on my own. So the system was user friendly enough for someone like myself to be able to maintain it. And then, and I would say that that is probably the biggest key, that it's so easy to use that even someone like myself was able to maintain it until more help arrived. So I then was able to hire teams who could help me with operations background. We were able to hire a business systems person who could focus their time on Ironclad needs. And I will share one other thing with the group here, Leslie, is that because
Yeah.
of our success in using Ironclad, about a year after that mini reimplementation, our legal ops team then invited Ironclad to be a participant in the RFP for the sales side.
Oh,
So,
nice.
and Ironclad was awarded the business. So I like to share that as kind of a success story. We were able to use it for procurement first, which is
Mm-hmm.
unusual. And then
Mm-hmm.
the sales side adopted it as well. And so we've been working together ever since.
That's awesome, Nancy. And it is a great story. We are proud to be able to support your legal, your procurement, and your sales team on their contracts. I'm very curious though, and many people hold Ironclad synonymous with legal ops, legal tech. And what I love about this story is that your legal team was the one that was ready to get rid of Ironclad when you came in the door. So I am curious, after your mini implementation and taking a better look at the business process and workflows that you needed, did it take away legal's heartache? It sounds like it did if legal ops was the champion for sales, but tell us a little bit about that. Why
Yeah.
did they jump on board after that?
Well, essentially, I think what it was streamlining the process. It was not it again, the original implementation no longer was relevant to the way we were currently operating. So it was clunky and there were challenges. But once we were able to streamline all of that and make it just more relevant to how we were reviewing contracts, for the legal team,
Yeah.
they were bought in. So I will say there were two people who supported vendor contracts, which I am so grateful for because not every procurement team gets that. But
Yeah.
one of them was had even used Ironclad in their past and did tell me, Nancy, it's actually a pretty good tool. So I did have 50% support from the legal side, but we did make it work better for the legal team.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And I'm just going to ask you one more question around using CLM and your process and your experience from a procurement perspective with this tool. How do you think about CLM as a procurement leader for you, Nancy? Why did you think this was critical to have? What was the business value you were trying to solve for to begin with?
Well, I have to say that in my past, I never had the luxury of having a tool for procurement. We were
Mm-hmm.
always an afterthought because, the companies, as they should, focus on the sales side first. So we would
Yeah.
piggyback on whatever system the sales teams were using.
Yeah.
So, but having now been on this other unusual circumstance of having the procurement side set up first, I truly feel like my team and I are set up for success so much better. That essentially, well, let me tell you a little bit about procurement. I'm stumbling here, but let
Don't
me tell you
worry,
a
you're
little bit
fine.
about CLM for procurement. So,
Okay.
as a procurement leader, building systems and building a department,
Yeah.
having a solid foundation is critical. And one of the beauties of being able to build, I can pick the systems that work for us, right? So essentially P2P is the fundamental basic for procurement. But for us here at Confluent, the CLM is just as critical. My team
Mm-hmm.
works in the tool every single day,
Mm-hmm.
and so much of the work that we do is about contracts. So for my sourcing team, essentially we need to have a really good handle on our contracts, and we need to know what we are buying, what is the company buying, and what are our obligations with those
Yeah.
contracts.
Yeah.
When are we renewing, are we able to terminate, all of these things. Ironclad allows my team to be able to have this information in one place. So it truly is a critical system for us in procurement.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Nancy. And I'm seeing some questions come in, and I'm just going to let the audience know some of these answers are coming. Nancy and I were able to talk about the talk track for this, so I'm just going to keep us moving. But don't worry, we see your questions, and I think the value and recommendations for implementation and stakeholder groups we're going to get to those in just a sec. In fact, we're going to move into the use cases you're leveraging right now, Nanci, and the impact you've seen. So can we start with just talking about some of those key benefits you're seeing from CLM as a foundation for procurement? What does that look like for you and your team right now?
So I mentioned that my team is in the tool every single day, right? So that's where they go to first every day. And one of the, I guess, super helpful things about it is that they can communicate with their business partners, with stakeholders within the tool about the status. So somebody could be, like, hey, what's going on here? And legal may have a question, they pop it in there. So we have all of that communication that we can track. It's stored in the system. It's also nice to have that history for audit purposes if needed. So that's in there. Streamlined approval processes. So we can configure the system to pull in the right people at the right time. So for example, legal doesn't need to review every single contract. So they don't need to review a field marketing restaurant contract, for example, but we need trust and security in because they're looking at integrations and they need to be pulled into every software contract. So we can configure it so that it's pulling those people in when they need it. So that's a huge benefit. Another thing is contract spend visibility. That's really important, having that all in one place. And also the data. So we will probably talk more about this deeper, but essentially the data that we can have that pulls for us to be able to report on is just invaluable. And also, as I mentioned, we are using the CLM for both our buy side as well as our sales side. And, that's maximizing the vendor value there. So that is those are all benefits to us and, to people in the procurement world.
Okay. And folks, we're going to get into some of the KPIs that Nanci is tracking as part of those value points she just mentioned. But before we do, this has come up, I think Christina in the audience has asked this, and we've talked about this, when we think about procurement and just actually from across sales, across any ERP, HR system, integrations are playing a huge role in unlocking CLM data. And I know that Confluent is using a Coupa integration today. So can you speak to how your team is using the integration and how that's helping drive impact for your stakeholders?
Absolutely. So the Coupa to Ironclad integration was a big win for procurement. We didn't do that until I think it was early 2023.
Okay.
So it was a little later than from our mini implementation, but a huge win for procurement. And essentially, users can initiate their purchase requisition in Coupa. So they kick off that in Coupa, but they can also, from their requisition is where they can kick off the Ironclad workflow. So essentially the the purchase requisition review and approval process and the contract review and approval process can happen in parallel. And that's a big time saving. So in my past, we'd have to wait for one to be complete before the other could begin. So this integration allows for those approvals to happen in parallel, which saves on cycle time. Another thing that is really important is for those of you in the procurement space, know that there's kind of a chicken and an egg situation, like what came first. And so in the procurement world, it's you don't want your purchase order to go to your vendor until your contract is fully approved, and vice versa. You don't want your approved contract going to your vendor if you don't have your financial approvals and an approved PO. So essentially, with Ironclad, we can hold. If the PR gets approved first, we can hold that PR, and then once the contract is fully approved, it can then be released, and then they're both sent to the vendor essentially at the same time, but of course one goes before the other, but close enough versus a situation that you don't want, committing when you're not fully approved. So so that integration has just been key for us there.
I have two things to say about that, Nanci. I will just say, as a business owner and someone who works with a lot of vendors, that is a huge deal for someone in marketing. As an example, I've been in situations where you're chasing the vendor to say, "Don't sign that yet. I'm waiting for my PR, and I need to make sure finance is approved." And so I think that that's huge.
Yeah.
And since Confluent is also using Salesforce, I just wanted to see, are you guys also using the SFDC integration into CLM?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not a part of that side of the business, but we are using the Salesforce integration.
No, I think it's great. And I think one of the reasons I ask is we really believe that we want to keep people in the systems that they know and love as part of the process of engaging with contracts. It makes the whole experience for your business users much better. And if like sales doesn't have to log into Ironclad, or all of the folks that are putting vendor agreements together don't have to log in, but your team is there, it really makes a difference in how adoption happens, which is something we've seen. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I know everybody on the call actually have seen 3 questions around value and KPIs. So can we give the folks what they're looking for, Nanci, and think about the metrics that you're tracking? I'd love to understand what some of the wins you've gotten from a value perspective into actual metrics. And maybe going a little bit further, as you've been able to find these metrics, have they helped you become more strategic in the company, or enabled business decisions to change, or for your team to think about things a little differently?
Absolutely. So one thing that I will share with the group here is that Ironclad has just massive amounts of metadata that we can collect for use cases and KPIs, for example. So some things that we track that could be meaningful to this group here are submission to signature cycle time. We also track total volume spend, like total volume of contracts and total volume spend. We do that monthly, quarterly, as well as annually. Contracts by region, subsidiary, department, and contract types. And so because we are tracking all of this, some of the data-based drivers for some key decisions for us is, for example, I was able to hire an additional person to my team on the sourcing side because we could see that the U.S. Contract volume continues to grow. It's the lion's share of all regions. So out of EMEA and APAC, U.S. has the largest volume. And I was able to support my decision to hire another individual in the U.S. for that. Another example is for APAC, we were able to reconfigure the basically the tolerance for where you pull in legal, because we could see the types of contracts that were being put through our APAC region were mostly low risk marketing type contracts. So we didn't need legal in every single one. We would pull them in if it hit a certain threshold, or pull them in if privacy was required, a privacy, PII was being exchanged, and pull them only when needed. And those are things that are so helpful. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without this massive amounts of data. So future state for Confluent is I would love to leverage this data even further and be able to, pull it into an analytics tool to be able to analyze the data even further. Oh, and one more thing is that legal, for example, we do have some metrics showing that over the years that legal involvement in our contracts has decreased. And we consider that as a win because they don't need to be in every single contract. They can be pulled in when necessary, and therefore our legal expertise can be used for the more strategic types of agreements where we do need their support in. So all around, the metadata that is available through Ironclad has been so helpful to us through the years.
That's awesome, Nanci. I think I've read looking at Confluent's history that you took your procurement cycle times from 17 days in 2022 down to 13 days in 2024. So you're 24% faster as well, which is always good from an efficiency perspective. But I don't want to gloss over the international and region examples you gave. As a marketing leader who had a lot of marketing folks in Latin America as example, and EMEA, I've had people really want to quit over the contract time when you think about legal's approval, security, privacy. So the fact that you as a procurement leader can say, here's where we don't need to bring people in, here's where we do need to bring people in, and enable like better judgment, less risks for the company, but also doing business faster is a huge value add. So
absolutely,
love that you're tracking that. Out of curiosity, how has this been able to change your relationship with the business? How have you been able to cross-functionally work smarter and faster and provide value to a marketing team like myself or anybody else that's working across the vendor relationships?
I think really the ease of use is probably the key thing, because anybody that you assign the role to, right, can use the system. And most of our, I guess, super users, if you will, for lack of a better term, are submitting their contracts, and we can communicate with them within the tool. And that ease and being able to just hop in there, collaborate in there, has been a huge help for all of our stakeholders across the entire company in all departments. So I would say ease of use, being able to collaborate within the tool is super helpful. On I guess another area is that we have trust and security built in there, and basically for legal and trust and security, they know that we have our approval process within there. I mentioned the audit trail. So essentially we can see who approved what, when for that particular contract, to make sure the right approvers and reviewers were in there. So that has also helped with those teams who are very much a part of the procurement process, but not in procurement, for example. And then lastly, for leadership, I would say Leslie, my CFO, can know that I have reliable P2P systems and a CLM to report data for him that's meaningful to him and his team. And so all of that, I think, is just invaluable for procurement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think, as you've gone through this process, and I promise everybody we're going to get to the Q&A section here in 1 second, but as you've gone through this process, building procurement teams in multiple different companies and at Confluent, what would be like some of your biggest pieces of advice for the folks on this call on how to educate the organization on adopting the process? Because you can build it till the cows come home. I think you hit on it a little bit with ease of use, but tell us what that looks like for how you're enabling your company to be part of the process.
Absolutely. So I've done this more than one time, and I will again be honest, it is not easy, right? It's not easy, especially when you're coming in and it's a less mature organization and people are running so as fast as they can to get their objectives done. When procurement is introduced, it is seen as another hurdle or another roadblock to them being able to achieve what they need to achieve. So what I have seen over these last few roles is the main thing is you got to keep it simple. You have to make the process as easy and accessible as possible. And I work under the accounting organization, so sometimes things can be very complicated, under that organization, as well with legal and trust and security, and rightly so. These are departments that are protecting the company at the highest levels. But you have to make it easy enough for people to want to use it and not go around the process. So I would say ease of use of your processes and systems is probably number one. And then second is to build the relationship with the business. So it is so important to build that. And it takes time, right? Because people
Yeah.
can do things better and faster on their own without you there. But as you build that and prove or demonstrate the value that you can bring, then people feel good, like, hey, this, it is not wasting my time, it's actually helping me save money, or they can negotiate something for me that I didn't think of because that's not my day to day. And so then the partnership comes in, and with that comes further I guess further opportunity and deeper relationships. And so
Yeah.
because I've been here almost 5 years, I can see that happening here, where people didn't want to talk to me in the beginning
Uh-huh.
and now are really happy to work with the team. So it's a journey,
Yes.
but I would say keeping it simple and building those relationships are key.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can say personally, as someone who, when I met you, Nanci, didn't want to work with you and
Yeah,
probably made your life a little bit challenging, saw the value that you and the team and any procurement team can bring. But it is hard because
yeah,
you are viewed sometimes as someone who's coming in to make the process more challenging versus just letting me
absolutely.
pay for what I want. Um,
Exactly.
but I think some of the value points that you're talking about here, like really bringing in legal when needed, understanding the cycle times getting smaller, not longer, really being able to influence business decisions of hiring so that the teams in region have more support. These are great ways to show value for your cross-functional stakeholders. And I appreciate you sharing them with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And so now we've got some questions. And I think I'm just going to start to jump on in, Nanci, if you are
Absolutely.
feeling good with that. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to, we're going to start going back to some of the stuff you talked about with the mini implementation. Juliana would love to know a little bit more about how you ensured that that was successful, or if you have any steps you'd recommend, especially when juggling multiple stakeholders across teams.
Leslie, can you repeat that for me again, please?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So when you think about the mini re-implementation that you
Oh,
did
yeah.
at Confluent, they want to know a little bit around how you ensured that one, you were able to drive to success on that, and how you would recommend working with multiple stakeholders across teams when you're doing a mini implementation. So how do you bring
Yeah.
people along on the journey to drive success,
Yeah.
basically?
Yeah. Well, I think that for that mini re-implementation, um, basically at that time, not everyone was putting their contracts through. So I
Mhm.
did have to do kind of a campaign, if you will. So company wide, I sent out an email and I said, hey, look, essentially, um, I'm Nanci. I am the
Yeah,
procurement department now, and we need you to please submit your, contracts through Ironclad. And we've, streamlined these things, but it's really important for the company. So it was this campaign that I put out there. And at that point, we didn't have Coupa yet. So
yeah,
then we rolled out Coupa. I was able to hire someone. We rolled out Coupa maybe 6 months later. But essentially, it's not easy, right? So it's communication, and letting the people know that they are supported. And I think people just want to get their thing purchased. They have to execute. They need to get whatever service or good purchase so they can do their job. And
yeah,
and as we are, putting more process around people and more, more process and steps, it's frustrating. And so it's just understanding that it's frustrating to the business, and really trying to put yourself in their shoes and then help them along that journey. So, I don't know if that's exactly the answer you were looking for, but essentially that's what I did with that situation. When we rolled out Coupa, then we had more communication. And then as we got more mature, we would communicate quarterly to people. We would say, please have your contracts in before this date for the contract. Before the quarter end. And so it's really communication, building that relationship, but it is a journey and it's not easy.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Honestly, anything cross-functional you're trying to do, build the trust, listen to your stakeholders, and continue to communicate early and often
Yeah.
is a great way to give that advice, Nanci.
Yeah.
We've got a few, and Juliana, I hope that answers your question. If you have any follow-ups, let us know. I'm gonna ask a couple questions, I think from a little bit of a different context. Arvind is asking, Nanci, do you use Ironclad for contracts formation and administration? So I don't know where the contracts are forming. Is that something that you're driving from a vendor template perspective? Do you have legal involved in that? What is that looking like?
Not today. So we are
Yeah.
not doing that today. What we are doing is we do have a few templates. I mean, we're still relatively small. I know there are smaller companies, but there are also much bigger ones, but we are using vendor paper and we are driving our paper where possible. So we are not creating that within Ironclad today, but certainly something would love to explore because it's continuous improvement, right? So if there are other ways we can be more efficient and utilize our tools more, we are looking into it. But to answer your question today, we are not doing that.
Okay. Okay. And Arvind, I'm going to give you some great metrics here at the end. And I think that will also answer Gabrielle's question. So hold on tight for that. We've got some metrics that Ironclad has tracked for Nanci. But Nanci, one thing that Tamara is asking about is, do you track turnaround times per contracting step, as well as the number of negotiation cycles per contract?
Yeah. Tamara, we are not tracking that, so we're not reporting on that, but in the tool, you are able to see the time, excuse me, in each step. So you are able to see that, but we are not tracking and reporting on those steps.
And then her third part of that would be, what about the most negotiated clauses? Are you tracking that?
That's a great question. We are not tracking that today. But my team, we do have a playbook that we work off of and use that, but we are not tracking those.
Okay. We're going to move to a question from Marina, and she was interested if your team manually enters in the metadata for each contract during the intake stage, supplier name, net terms, entity, or is this automated with the Coupa integration? This
Some
is something.
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Great question, Irina. So the way we are currently doing it is that the user can kick off in Coupa, and then it triggers the workflow to Ironclad from there. Some of the data does pull over. I can't tell you off the top of my head what does, but some of the data does map over into Ironclad. Then the user has to complete the rest of the Ironclad questions that were not on Coupa. So for example, we have a number of privacy questions and trust and security questions that are a part of our workflow that are not in Coupa. So they can just click on the link and it takes them there to complete the rest of those items. Some of the fields are drop down, so you can build that in as a drop down. You don't have to manually type it in. So it's a mix. Some fields are free form. So perhaps I can't think of it now, but there's a few free form, a few pull in from Coupa, and a few drop downs. Yeah.
And Mariana, thank you for the suggestion. A smart import option would definitely be time saving there. I'm going to follow up with you on that one. I think we do have some workarounds in some cases on how we can do that, but I appreciate the feedback. Marina, excuse me. I think I said Mariana. Marina. Oh. I think we're answered for there, but Marina, we'll follow up with you a little bit more on some of that. And then we have another question from Jamie, from Jaime, excuse me. Jaime is asking, how is the procurement side different from the legal side, Nanci, in this contracting process?
Well, we are managing them separately. So so we are managing them completely separately. So the sales team and legal ops manages that side. And essentially there's workflows within Ironclad, and ours are designated as vendor-facing contracts. So there's a list of drop downs that any Ironclad user can click on. And so for us, there are certain things we need for procurement when you're buying. And so our workflows are designed for us in procurement. And then for the sales side, I don't manage that side, but they have their requirements, and then there's the integration into Salesforce.
Perfect. And I do want to talk about that just 1 second before we go to another question, Nanci, because we've been able to track some dramatic reduction in the legal department. You mentioned this earlier in the webinar, but Confluent has been able to see workflows that require legal involvement drop from 40% in 2022 to 18% in 2024, representing a 55% reduction in legal's involvement and freeing your legal team up to do more strategic work. And I think that is a huge time savings. It looked like Confluent can get their average contract through in 9 days, but if legal's involved, it's 17 days, because what you're doing is bringing them in for the much more hardcore negotiation contracts, the ones that they really need to look at from a risk and compliance perspective.
Yeah. And again, we configured that so that they're pulled in automatically when needed. You can also tag them if one of my team members says, hey, I really do need legal to look at this. Maybe the threshold didn't trigger legal, and then they can pull them in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. I'm looking for any more questions in here. I think we got one in the chat I haven't seen pop in yet. There was one around managing credit card spend that doesn't have a contractual basis. Scale purchases from retail vendors, for example, is there compliance vendor performance integrated into Ironclad at all for contract renewals?
Well, on the credit card side, so if I'm not answering this correctly, I apologize. But for the credit card side, that is completely separate. For Confluent, we have a small card program, and for the card holders, we have shared with them, look, we have a procurement process, we have a procurement team. Any spend that should be put through the procurement process, we want off of your credit card. So over the years, we've been actively managing our credit card users. So software is not allowed. It's actually prohibited by our policy. So no one should be putting software on their card. But anything else that can be put through the procurement process, we work with the individuals to migrate that to our process. So we have that. But in terms of I think the second part of that question, I would need to rehear.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. Let me see if I've got it in here. I just lost it. Is compliance vendor performance integrated into Ironclad at all for contract renewals?
Not for us today. We are not doing that. However, our trust and security team is pulled in when required. They do review every renewal and every new contract. So they do their diligence behind the scenes. So they are in Ironclad for an approval, but they do additional deep diving into those reviews, and they have their own process, but they do require approval, and they won't approve it until they've completed their process in the back end. So to that extent, there is vendor compliance that we try to ensure.
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to tag team 2 more questions together, Nanci, that John and Tamara are asking. Basically, is procurement acting as a quasi-legal department for reviewing terms? And or then how is the tool catching items that need to go to legal? So where is that? Probably, I'm going to say, is in your business workflow, and you guys worked on the templates that need to happen there.
Correct. Okay. So procurement, my sourcing managers are very experienced. So there are things that they do look for and can do on their own in terms of legal clauses. We automatically pull in legal when certain questions are answered and certain thresholds are triggered. So they're pulled in, and we do have dedicated legal support for us. But my team is seasoned enough that they look for commercial terms and certain things on their own there, and are able to.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to switch tones completely a little bit because there's a hot topic out there in the market. Some have heard of it. It's called AI. So Nanci, we've gotten a couple questions come in around, AI specifically and how you're thinking about this. What does your strategy look like for implementing anything AI related? And I know you're already talking to the team about this. So why don't you give the folks a little bit of information there?
Yes. So we currently today are not using the AI capabilities with Ironclad. We are evaluating it to see that if it will work for us. So that is currently in the works. So we are today not using it, but Ironclad does offer AI capabilities, and I do think it is worth looking at. So my team will be doing that in the near future.
Yeah, and I'll just say to anybody on the chat and on the webinar, we've focused a lot on legal and AI. If you go to our website, ironclad.ai, there's a lot of how legal is implementing AI. What we're seeing in the market from a survey that we did of over 800 legal professionals, State of AI, and also the Legal AI Handbook. All of that is actually pretty relevant for procurement as well. And from a product perspective with our AI playbooks and leveraging smart import, there's a lot of different capabilities that Ironclad will offer you and more coming quickly. So I'll put that out there as a teaser, but there's a lot happening there. And for anybody that has additional questions, we're happy to follow up on those. I think right now we've gotten all the questions that are in the audience. Nanci, there was one question at the very beginning from Gabrielle. What's the primary way you leverage Ironclad to deliver value to your stakeholders? I think we've answered that quite a bit, but if you were to summarize like the biggest way you're seeing value for your stakeholders and maybe to your business, how would you summarize that?
I would say the biggest value for us is I have to go back to the ease of use and the ability to collaborate with our business, and then leveraging the data that we get to be able to make changes. And I shared a couple of those examples with you all where I wouldn't have known that, without the tool and being able to pull the data, that for specifically APAC, that it was mostly marketing. I mean, you could guess that, right? You could guess it, but to have the concrete data validate what you are thinking and therefore say, hey, I don't need legal so legal for APAC for us is shared. It's not dedicated legal services like we have here in the US. So their team is smaller and they don't have time for that. So to be able to give them back time to be able to focus on those revenue contracts, I think is huge. And it also for the users to save time to be able to turn those event contracts around to their vendor so they can get on with getting their event set up. So time savings, and it's all because we have that visibility.
Absolutely. That's amazing. That's amazing. And as we, from an Ironclad perspective, think about the value, Gabrielle, that we hope all of our customers achieve, we really want you to maintain the agility in your business for faster execution of contracts, be able to optimize your resource allocation, as Nanci talked about, where you need more resources, why, and where you can save legal's time, how you find cost savings and reduce bottlenecks with vendor approvals, and just improve your vendor relationships. I think quicker turnaround times for everyone makes for a better business relationship. So overall, I just want to say to you, Nanci, I don't see any more questions in the chat. I think we've given a lot to think about for folks that are here. And I want to say to the audience, my God, thank you so much for the great questions, you guys. That's been fantastic. And I'm really excited we have such an international team. Nanci, thank you so much.
Leslie, before we part, I do want to just offer for any questions for me that we
Yeah.
didn't get to answer or I didn't answer properly, you can feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. When you do, let me know that you are on this webinar so I can have an association there, but feel free to do that and I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm very open to sharing. I feel that we as, business leaders, procurement leaders can really help each other out by sharing, knowledge. It's not confidential, right? It's just process,
Yeah.
how we have learned to do things better. And I am happy to share if I know. I mean, I may not know, but if if I know, I can help you. So
I
thanks,
think
Leslie.
that just makes you so much more amazing, Nanci. For those that haven't already fallen in love with you on this call, Nanci is one of the most humble, amazing leaders I've ever worked with. So I just want to say that, Nanci. And for all of you on the call, and Nanci, thank you for your time today. For everyone else, you can reach out to Nanci. She offered that. So thank you, Nanci, for that. And then for those of you that want more information, this is recorded. You should receive it in the next 24 hours. And there's a link in the chat to reach out to our team if there's any other questions we didn't get to or that come up a little bit later. So with that, I guess we're going to part ways. But I loved having this hour with you, Nanci. Thank you again.
Thank you, Leslie, and Ironclad team and everyone. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.